November 8th, 1861. 78 years since the American Revolution and 46 years since the War of 1812, an act that breached international law threatened a third Anglo-American war. The diplomatic affair over the seizure of two Confederate envoys from the RMS Trent provoked a debate between Great Britain and the United States, consequently leading to a failure of the Confederacy and successfully contributing to a permanent alliance between the United States and Great Britain. The Civil War's Trent Affair. Successful diplomacy solves an international debate. After the War of 1812, the relationship between the United States and Great Britain was strained. Neither side fully trusted the other, which led to diplomatic tension. The diplomatic tensions rose with the outbreak of the Civil War, when the Union declared their blockade of the southern ports on April 19, 1861. The blockade would prevent Great Britain from gaining access to cotton, which supplied its textile industry. Shortly thereafter, Great Britain came forward and made a declaration of neutrality on May 14, 1861. In this declaration, Great Britain declared the Confederacy as a belligerent power. Both the Confederacy and the Union were dissatisfied with this. The Union did not want Europe to believe that the Civil War was anything more than a small rebellion, and therefore did not want Great Britain to declare the Confederacy as a belligerent power. Charles Francis Adams, the minister to Great Britain, was told by Secretary of State William H. Seward to warn the British that war results from the action of Great Britain, not our own, that Great Britain will have decided to fraternize with our domestic enemy, either without waiting to hear from you our remonstrances and our warnings. The Confederacy, however, was happy to have recognition as a belligerent, but wanted the recognition of a full nation. To achieve this, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, planned 2 diplomatic missions to different countries in Europe. Both were failures. Not giving up, Davis planned a 3rd mission, this time with the diplomats James Mason of Virginia and John Slidell of Louisiana. Evading the blockade, they snuck out of Charleston, South Carolina, and headed for Cuba, where they boarded the British mail steamer the RMS Trent. Hearing that Slidell and Mason were in Cuba, the naval captain of the USS San Jacinto, Charles Wilkes, went against orders and intercepted the Trent. When he stopped the ship, he sent Lieutenant Donald Fairfax to board it. Based on orders given by Wilkes, Fairfax declared that he would remove the ambassadors and the ambassadors' secretaries. Once they were taken off the ship, the Trent was allowed to continue to Great Britain. The San Jacinto went to Boston, where the envoys and their secretaries were imprisoned at Fort Warren. The initial reaction from the Union was a happy one. Prior to the San Jacinto, the Union Navy had sent out 3 warships to look for the Confederate diplomats, and all 3 came back empty-handed. Although Wilkes acted without orders, the government viewed it as a lawful act of warfare. The New York Times reported, "We do not believe the American heart ever thrilled with more genuine delight than it did yesterday at the intelligence of the captures of Messrs. Slidell and Mason." According to Sir William Howard Russell, an Irish reporter for the London Times, all the American papers have agreed that the Trent business is quite according to law, custom, and international comedy, and that England can do nothing. In the Confederacy, they were also optimistic for another reason. The Confederates hoped that Great Britain would react harshly towards the Union because of the seizure. In their mind, when Great Britain would become mad at the Union, they would side with the Confederacy and help them become an independent nation. The British, however, were not happy. They believed that Wilkes violated international law because Mason and Slidell were on a neutral vessel. In a letter to Foreign Secretary John Russell, the British ambassador to the United States, Lord Lyons, claimed, "The commander of the Trent and Commander Williams protested against the act of taking by force out of the Trent these 4 passengers, then under the protection of the British flag." On top of that, the British reflected on a war that had occurred less than 50 years prior, the War of 1812, in which the United States declared war on the British as a result of numerous things, including the Orders in Council, which allowed any ship that was heading for a French port to be searched and seized. When Great Britain heard of the Trent Affair, they were reminded that the U.S. had gone to war over the exact thing they were guilty of. In Washington, the government decided that it would be best to wait for the British response. Unfortunately for the United States, the British viewed it as the government being completely fine with the incident. On top of that, no one trusted the United States after Seward had repeatedly stated that the U.S. would go to war with Great Britain to end the Civil War. Anthony Trollope, an English novelist, reflected on the affair in his book North America. It was clear that all the world was in a state of the profoundest nervous anxiety on the subject. As a result, Great Britain decided to try diplomacy by writing to Lord Lyons explaining their position. Lord Russell was charged with the task and wrote 3 letters to Lord Lyons. The first letter made the case. It talked about the rights of neutral countries in the time of war, the rights of neutral ships, and the protections of diplomatic correspondence. The second specified the threat that the United States was in. If they failed to comply within 7 days of receiving news, Great Britain would declare war. The third and final letter was specific instructions for Lord Lyons about how to relay the information to Seward. At the same time, Great Britain started preparing for the worst and even deployed their military into Canada. If the United States declared war, they would be met with a two-front conflict which could end the Civil War in the Confederacy's favor and would be catastrophic for both the United States and Great Britain. Back in Washington, D.C., the Lincoln administration didn't believe there was a problem with the issue until the British newspapers arrived and they saw the British reaction for the very first time. Once Seward found out about the reaction, he knew he only had 3 solutions: continue with war, support arbitration, or give Great Britain what they wanted, all of which would either help diplomacy or cause an even larger debate. The controversy led to a divide in Lincoln's cabinet. One side, led by Charles Sumner, was in favor of war. The other, led by Seward, was against it. In U.S. Attorney General Edward Bates's diary, he claims, "We must not have war with England." Meanwhile, Great Britain was fully prepared for it. On the exact same day that Bates wrote in his journal, the London Times stated, "It is quite possible that while England is ruling undisputed mistress of the waves, a Yankee frigate may appear some fine morning off one of our ports and inflict no slight damage upon us." To solve this problem, Seward drafted a response to Lord Lyons in which he dismissed the issue simply as Wilkes forgetting to take the prisoners to a prize court. The United States would then send the commissioners to the countries in which they were intended to go. In this way, Seward believed, the people would view it as a victory for American neutral rights and would use this to sway Lincoln's cabinet. On December 26, 1861, Seward made his proposals to Lincoln's cabinet. To his surprise, it passed, and on January 1, 1862, the commissioners were released. In the Confederacy, however, they were worried that the effects of the Trent Affair did more harm than good for them. John B. Jones, a Confederate Army officer, blamed Seward for hurting the Confederacy's diplomacy and said, "Now we must depend upon our own strong arms and stout hearts for defense." When Slidell and Mason finally reached Great Britain on January 29, 1862, there was little excitement. The news had warned people not to celebrate them in case it threatened Great Britain's cotton supply. At that point, most of the high tensions in Great Britain had cooled and the issue was settled. However, the Trent Affair left a harsh impact on Anglo-American relations. It caused Great Britain to greatly distrust the United States, and for the rest of the American Civil War, Great Britain was on edge to see what the United States and Confederacy would do next. As Lord Palmerston remarked at the end of the war, the North wished us to declare on their side and the South on theirs, and we wished to maintain a perfect neutrality. Despite this, Great Britain and the United States continued to use the diplomacy that was established with the Trent Affair throughout the rest of the war and beyond. The willingness to use diplomacy led to a long-lasting alliance between the two nations. That alliance has been upheld continually throughout the rest of the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, through both world wars, climate action, and the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine. The current Prime Minister of England, Boris Johnson, was interviewed by the BBC after the G7 summit in June 2021. He spoke of the relationship between the United States and Great Britain, claiming,
"It's a relationship that has endured for a very long time and has been an important part of peace and prosperity, both in Europe and around the world."
As a result of the debate and diplomacy of the Trent Affair, the United States and Great Britain successfully established a permanent alliance that has survived through times of turmoil and times of peace. As President Ulysses S. Grant stated in his memoirs, "England and the United States are natural allies and should be the best of friends."